Today we're doing something that always causes me a little bit of internal anguish, and that is creating more whips for myself. At this point, I think I just need to accept that I'm going to be a colorist who always has a few whips on the go, especially with the way that my content is currently evolving. I'm just enjoying working on multiple pages in my videos. It's more interesting for me to film and edit, and I think it's more interesting for you all to watch as well. So yes, I'm embracing my chaotic multi-whip fate because today I am finally trying all the coloring techniques that I've been avoiding. The main reasons I've been avoiding them: number one, I haven't been prioritizing them. They keep falling lower and lower on my to-do list. And two, I'm just a little bit scared to try them. But no more excuses. Today I am testing them all. We'll be playing around with a bunch of different mediums, neocolor 2s, alcohol markers, watercolors, stickers, and even washi tape. And just be prepared for a little bit of chaos because, yeah, not everything went to plan. Alright, enough blabbing from me, let's just get into it. A technique I've been meaning to try for what I think is over a year now is actually coloring with washi tape. I first saw Olivia Oderon do this on their channel, and I thought it was such a clever way of adding patterns and visual interest to your pages without having to draw in all those little details yourself. That said, the idea of coloring and shading over the top of washi tape does seem a little bit precarious to me. So today I'll be testing it out, see if it actually works, and we're going to be trying it in Eriy's World Legends. Now this is actually already a whip I have on the go at the moment. All the coloring I've done on this page so far has been on the channel, and so I figured why don't we just keep on working on it together. And I thought the perfect place on this page to experiment with washi tape is this pole right here. I want to add some fun pattern to every second strip on the pole and hopefully not make a complete mess of it. When it came to picking the tape, I was looking for something that was semi-transparent and had somewhat of a paper-like texture. I obviously won't be able to shade over something that's super shiny or plasticky. These were the two tapes that I narrowed it down to, and I did end up choosing the top one. It was a little bit more subtle, and the floral pattern on the other one just felt a little too large to translate well onto the page. The approach I took for actually applying the washi tape was to lightly stick it on the page first, sketch out the shape I needed with a pencil, then cut it out and reapply it. And thankfully, it was way less stressful than I anticipated. I know in Olivia's tutorial, they cut the shape directly on the page using a craft knife, but I do not trust myself with that. This method felt a lot safer and more manageable for me, who is extremely clumsy. Next, I went in and based the alternating stripes on the pole using an Artex watercolor pencil. And I'll admit, I did have a brief moment of panic. I was like, wait, is this a terrible idea to use a water-soluble medium right next to washi tape? But thank the coloring gods, it all turned out fine. There was no issues at all. Then came the scary part, which was actually coloring over the washi tape. Going back to Olivia's tutorial, they recommended using Prismacolors. Apparently a super waxy pencil worked best, and it totally did. It definitely wasn't as easy as coloring directly on paper, getting a smooth blend. It was tricky. I had to keep coloring between, the texture of the tape and the actual page, so the surface was definitely inconsistent. But overall, it was manageable. I did manage to do it. Looking back, I maybe should have gone with the other washi tape option. The pattern on this one kind of got lost in the shading. So that's definitely something I will think about next time and what I'd recommend to you. Pick a pattern with a little bit more contrast so it doesn't completely disappear once you color over the top of it with pencil. I then finished the pole section off camera so I could see how everything was looking in a greater context, and here it is. I think it actually came together pretty well. It adds a bit of extra interest to an element I probably would have just shaded pretty simply otherwise. And yeah, I can definitely see myself using washi tape to color again in the future. The next book you're going to see me working in is Magical Jungle by Johanna Basford, and this page is from my 25 pages to color in 2025 challenge, so I don't feel as bad as making this a whip for myself. And I actually chose it for the prompt, the most detailed page. Ever since picking this one at the beginning of the year, I've had this idea of segmenting the page into different sections and then coloring each section in a different color palette, just to break up the symmetry and make it feel less repetitive to color. I've seen this kind of effect pop up a lot in the simple and bold coloring genre recently, and I thought, yes, that's exactly the vibe that I'm going for. And then there's another technique that I've always had in mind that I thought I could kind of blend together with the previous one, and that is basing the entire page with watercolors without masking off any of the illustration elements, and then coloring everything in to match the base washes of color. I know I'm not explaining it very well, but you'll see what I mean as we go along. So obviously the first step was to divide the page into segments. I wanted to create 8 sections radiating out from the center like a pinwheel. And yeah, I didn't measure anything exactly. I just eyeballed it based on the illustration, and surprisingly, it turned out pretty even. Then I masked off the segments with the washi tape and decided that the opposite segments would share the same color palette. So the first 2 segments I ended up painting with a mix of blues and yellows, and then the other 2 were a mix of yellows and oranges. Now, I don't think I've used watercolors in a Johanna Basford book before. If I have, I've completely erased it from my memory. And yes, I will not be doing it again. The paper just soaked up the watercolor immediately, and it dried so fast that it made blending pretty much impossible. I did make it work in the end, but watercolors in Johanna's books are going to be a no from me in the future. Next, I used a grey alcohol marker to base the remaining segments. I chose not to use watercolor again because I wanted more precision and didn't feel like going through the whole masking process all over again. But in retrospect, I kind of wish I had used watercolors. The alcohol marker didn't look bad necessarily. It wasn't super streaky or anything, but it also didn't give a nice even coverage. Plus, I think it would have looked more cohesive if the grey segments had that same colour variation that the watercolour segments had. But alas, you live and you learn, and honestly, I'm just acting as a guinea pig most of the time in my videos. That way you can see what works and what doesn't when you try it out yourself. Now, I only ended up shading one of the blue segments and one of the grey segments for this video. There was no way I was getting this entire page done in one sitting, but I think this gives you a good idea of how I'm going to approach the rest of the page and what the final result might look like. When it came to coloring the blue segment, I pulled a bunch of colors that matched the watercolor basing and shaded the elements somewhat according to that guide. So if there was yellow watercolor in the background, the element on top, I would color yellow. If there was blue in the background, I'd color those elements blue, so on, so forth. I definitely wasn't strict about it though. It was just helpful to have it as a guide whilst I was coloring. And honestly, I think this technique or approach or whatever you want to call it really helped keep the coloring process less monotonous as I was hoping for. Usually I avoid super repetitive or symmetrical pages like this one because I get bored coloring the same thing over and over again, but this didn't feel like that at all. I was using different colors for the same repetitive shapes, and I almost forgot that I was coloring the same leaf 6 times or the same flower 8 times. So if you've ever felt intimidated or bored by the prospect of coloring a repetitive page, I highly recommend trying a technique like this out. It keeps things fresh and interesting whilst also giving the final results some more visual appeal and dynamicism. Is that a word? It makes it look more dynamic. We got there in the end. When it came to coloring the grey segment, I just went with one standard grey colour combo. Looking back, I do wonder if maybe I should have used a few different tones of grey to match the variety and depth of the segment next to it. But at the same time, I kind of like the uniformity. It really allows the colourful segment to pop and take centre stage. And I think once the full page is finished, I'll have a better sense of whether or not it needs more depth. As you would have seen in the earlier coloured examples that I showed you before, I did decide to add some of those acrylic marker dots to create a fun magical transition between the two differently coloured segments. A lot of colorists use this technique when doing this kind of grayscale versus colourful effect, and you know me, I will use any excuse to add acrylic marker dots to my pages. And then yeah, that is pretty much the page for now. I'll continue the same process for the rest of the page, and if all goes to plan, it should be a really fun and dynamic result. One thing I do need to figure out eventually though is what to do with the outer edge of the page. You know, where the pattern ends and there's that awkward bit of empty space between the design and the edge of the paper. Right now, I don't know, it looks a little bit unfinished. I did think about extending that sort of magical acrylic marker dot effect to the edges of the paper to create almost a vignette vibe. Or maybe I should just do a clean acrylic marker frame. Let me know what you think. Do either of those sound good? Overall though, I do think the techniques did turn out really well. I'll definitely be doing the grayscale / colourful effect again. And I think I will base with watercolors again as well, just not in Johanna Basford's books. Lesson learned. Moving on to the third book for this video, we've got Vibrant Wilds by Sara Clark. And yet again, I'm going to try out a couple of techniques on a single page. This is the page that I've chosen, and the techniques that I want to try out are basing with neocolor 2s, and then also using some coloring stickers. I was fortunate enough to receive this floral sticker pad from Sara, and ever since it's arrived, I've been trying to figure out how I can use these stickers in my coloring pages. They are technically designed for Sara's coloring planners, but because I'm not a physical planner girly, I thought why not repurpose them for extra details in my coloring pages, if I can make it work. So my idea was to use the stickers to decorate the vase on this page. And after flipping through a few of the sticker sheets, I landed on this one. It had a nice subtle assortment of designs that didn't feel too overpowering and also matched the floral vibe of the illustration. And of course it does help that the stickers and the book are illustrated by Sara. So stylistically, everything matches very nicely. When it came to applying the stickers, I initially used the same approach as I did for the washi tape. However, this was a lot more difficult than I expected. Eventually I figured out a better system. Don't actually press the sticker down until I'd fully trimmed it to the right shape. But wow, that first sticker was an absolute disaster. I tore the edge trying to reposition it, then attempted to redraw the line work with a fine liner, and then of course, because the surface was ripped, the ink started bleeding on the page. Then I tried trimming that damaged bit with nail clippers. Yes, I used nail clippers on my coloring page. It was a mess. It was a right old mess. But in the end, I got it looking somewhat less messy. Anyway, next up was basing the vase with the Neocolor 2s. I decided to pull the pigment directly from the pastel using a water brush rather than applying it straight to the page and then activating it with water. I figured this method would give me a bit more control, especially around the sticker areas. And it was a better choice for the stickers. But for the vase itself, yeah, it ended up looking really streaky and uneven. I know I could have gone in with a second layer, but I didn't want the basing to get too dark. So once again, this page had me on struggle street. I wasn't too stressed about this faux pas though, because I knew I could smooth it out with my Prismacolors, and that's exactly what I did next. Much like washi tape, blending over the edges of the stickers was a little bit chaotic. Obviously the stickers were slightly raised on the paper, so it wasn't the easiest surface to work across. But with some very heavy burnishing and a lot of hand pressure, I managed to get a decent blend and also cover up that little mishap that I had on the right hand side of the vase. Also, I just wanted to say that I wasn't sure what coloring on these stickers would be like. And I was genuinely shocked at how smoothly my pencils blended on whatever surface material these stickers are made out of. I mean, all of Sara's products are such great quality, so really, should I have been surprised? Absolutely not. Lately, something I've been trying to wrap my head around is how to shade an object when it has a multicolored pattern on it. In this case, I could have just followed the same shading placement I used for the vase itself whilst shading the floral stickers, but I didn't think that would really give me the result I was envisioning. So instead, I decided to try using a dark brown Prismacolor to deepen the shadows of the vase whilst also blending some of that shadow over top of the stickers. The idea was to make the stickers feel more integrated rather than, just sitting on top of the vase. And I don't think it turned out too bad. It's definitely not perfect, and I did have to go back in with some of my lighter shades from my original vase color combo, to help blend the brown into the blue, orange, and green. But I think it's a solid attempt at shading a patterned object with multiple colors. Definitely something I want to keep practicing on future pages. So after finishing all of the pencil work, I then went in with a pale yellow acrylic marker to add some little highlights to give the illusion that the vase was a little bit glossy and shiny. And here is how it turned out. Considering all the issues I ran into along the way, I think the final result isn't too shabby. I probably won't be reaching for my Neocolor 2s again for basing just because I have other mediums I prefer more, but it was still a worthwhile experiment. And as for the stickers, I can see myself using them again in my coloring pages, but maybe for a more mixed media style background, rather than cutting them down to fit within a specific object. That part was just a little bit too fiddly for my liking, but hey, never say never. The final book I'll be coloring in this video is Spooky by szewczyk. And the page I've chosen is also from my 25 pages to color in 2025 challenge. And this was picked for the prompt, a page set in spring. And I know it's not looking super springy right now, but I'm hoping I can really elevate those spring vibes throughout the coloring process. The coloring technique I wanted to try in this illustration is another one that is very popular in the simple and bold coloring genre, and it's this lighting effect right here. It's where you create one or multiple light rays within the illustration. And there are two common ways that I've seen people do this online. The first way is to pick a lighter and darker marker of the same color, and then obviously use the darker color for all the shadowed areas and then the lighter color for the highlight areas. Whereas the second method, which is the one I'll be trying today, involves first laying down a base of gray alcohol marker in the areas you want to be shadowed, and then you color over the whole page as you normally would. I personally think this method seems a little bit more effective than the first, just because you can then make sure all your shadows have the same tone. So the first thing I did was obviously sketch out where I wanted my light ray to be. And then I went straight in with my grey alcohol marker. I picked a shade that I felt was dark enough to actually show up on the page, but not so dark that it would overpower the colours once I, layered over the top of this grey base. Once all the grey shading was mapped out, I then went in with my quote-unquote regular alcohol marker colours to base the page as usual. And just a note, I am only using my alcohol markers to base the page, as I wanted to do all the actual shading with my coloured pencils after the fact. And I was also pretty intentional about the colours that I chose to layer over the top of the grey. Normally I tend to reach for lighter alcohol markers for basing, like a lot lighter than what I'm using here. But prior to filming, I did a bit of testing at the back of this book, and I found that if I used too light of a colours over top of the grey, it created almost this mottled effect, kind of what you would see if you were using the colourless blender pen. And obviously that is not what we want. So yes, definitely lean towards darker alcohol markers rather than pastels when colouring over a grey base. So this is what the page was looking like after all the alcohol marker basing was complete, and the effect was definitely working. It's not super obvious, but it's not super subtle either. Like, you can tell there's a spotlight there, but it's not glaringly apparent. Now I did want to quickly show you how I'm going to approach shading the rest of the page with my Artex pencils, just by colouring the light green elements on the page to give you an idea. And yes, I am yet again just experimenting here. I never really know what I'm doing. And I wasn't sure whether I needed to choose a different combo of pencils for the shadowed areas versus the spotlight area for each element. So I did just try using one combo for both, and it actually worked. Because you have that base of grey alcohol marker underneath, you don't lose the shadowed effect when you colour over the top with coloured pencil. The only thing I changed between the shadowed and highlight areas when shading with my coloured pencils was the final step that I often like to do in my colouring process, where right at the end I go in with an even darker pencil than what I've already used on the page and deepen the depth and dimension just a little bit further. So for the highlighted area, I deepened my shading with a dark green, whereas for the shadowed areas, I deepened with a super dark brown. I found that this helped very subtly differentiate the two areas on the page. But anyway, here's how the page is currently looking, and I'm really happy with how it's shaping up so far. I'm deeming this technique as a success, and I'm already really excited to try it again in the future. Maybe even try adding multiple light rays to a page next time as well. That said, I'm a little concerned that the lighting effect might get toned down once I start adding more pencil shading. So I've been toying with the idea of going back in at the very end with my grey alcohol marker, but I've never tried using alcohol marker over the top of coloured pencil, and I really don't want to risk messing up the page, at the final step. So maybe I should just go in with a super light layer of grey pencil instead. Yet again, that's a problem for future Kira to sort out. But there you have it, team. Those are all the colouring techniques I've been avoiding, but avoided no longer. We definitely had a few mishaps along the way. However, I do think these pages are now coming along pretty well, and I'm excited to finish them all off at some point in the future. Actually, that reminds me, I wanted to know if you would be interested in some sort of whip takedown vlog. I'm thinking of filming a video where I try to color as many whips as possible within a certain time period. I'm still not exactly sure how I'd structure that video because, you know, me sitting down for 10 hours straight coloring doesn't sound very exciting, but if the concept is appealing to you, definitely let me know in the comments below. And in the meantime, happy coloring, friends. Have a good day, have a good life, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!